Hello and welcome to Freedom News, the news you can use to help keep Canada free. Alright, I have here before me the full written submission made by Jody Wilson-Raybould to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. I'll endeavor to read this here for you. It is long. Please bear with me as I read this. Dear Mr. Housefather and committee members, regarding Honorable Jody Wilson-Raybould, MP, submissions to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Thank you to the Chair and members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights for the opportunity to provide a written submission to supplement my testimony of February 27th, 2019 in relation to your study on remediation agreements, the Shawcross Doctrine, and the discussion between the Office of the Attorney General and government colleagues. The majority of this submission is in the form of texts and emails, which is in response to Mr. Rankin's request during my testimony to provide the committee with a copy of all the text messages and emails that I referred to in my testimony. Excuse me. I took that request under advisement during my testimony. I am now making information that is in my possession available to the committee as requested, supplemented where necessary by additional context to assist understanding of the records. I have attached these documents in appendices A through E. In responding to this request, I, of course, continue to do so in accordance to the Order in Council number 2019-0105, which addresses my time as Attorney General of Canada in relation to the exercise of the authority of the Attorney General of Canada under the Director of Public Prosecutions Act. So, in other words, it's all under the same gag order that she's always been on. The fact that it's not fully been lifted. In my view, the context for your study and all of your deliberations is the core principle of prosecutorial independence, a principle that at times appears to have been obscured by layers of commentary, hyperbole, and spin. The real issues engaged by this matter, the issues that will inform what type of Canada we want to live in and pass on to the next generations are not ultimately about how things are experienced, caucus dynamics, political ambitions, poll numbers, erosions of trust, or the role of social media. Rather, the substantive issues raised by this matter are about prosecutorial independence, the rule of law, and certain processes and institutions of our system of democracy. There are two aspects of these matters that I wish to emphasize and which broadly respond to aspects of testimony provided before the committee. Number one, nonpartisanship and prosecutorial independence. Prosecutorial decisions must be made in a nonpartisan and objective manner that is independent from the political pressures of the government and protected from the influence of improper political and other vitiating factors. This independence is required in relation to every prosecutorial decision, including decisions to commence, continue, or terminate criminal proceedings. The legal powers of the Attorney General with respect to deferred prosecution agreements, the powers I was charged to uphold when Attorney General, were designed to preserve these essential nonpartisan and objective values. Under Section 3, Subsection 3 of the Director of Public Prosecutions Act in 2006, the Attorney General has the power to assume the conduct of prosecutions. Section 15. As well, the Attorney General is empowered to issue directives to the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, in respect of prosecutions generally or in the respect of specific prosecutions, Section 10. With respect to the Section 15 power of the Attorney General to take over a prosecution from the DPP, the Act provides that the Attorney General must first consult the DPP regarding his or her decision to assume conduct of a prosecution and must publish notice in the Canada Gazette without delay, unless either the Attorney General or the DPP considers a delay in notice to be justified in the interest of the administration of justice. In substituting herself for the DPP and taking over a prosecution, the Attorney General must act with a judicial mind, maintaining the firm constitutional principle that criminal prosecutions are to be independent of political considerations and managed in the public interest. All of these elements are designed to preserve the nonpartisan and objective character of prosecutorial discretion. To date, as I mentioned in my testimony, no Attorney General has ever assumed conduct of a prosecution under Section 15. Regarding the Section 10 power of the Attorney General to issue directives with respect to specific cases, Section 10, subsection 1, or to cases generally, Section 10, subsection 2, such directives must also be published in the Canada Gazette. Section 10 should not be taken as authorizing an Attorney General to issue any directive she wishes to prosecutors, because prosecutorial independence is a constitutional principle. Any directive must be the result of objective, independent, and nonpartisan considerations and respect the Shawcross principle. By necessity, any directive issued under Section 10, subsection 1 must and will be heavily scrutinized on the question of whether it is politically motivated, as the issuance of a directive would be highly unusual. To date, no Attorney General has ever issued any directives in respect of specific cases under Section 10, subsection 1. There have been 2 general directives issued under Section 10, subsection 2, which deal with terrorism and HIV non-disclosure. Number 2, the decision of the Attorney General. The fact that no decision as to how prosecutorial discretion is exercised is final until the prosecution Section 2 officially actually starts here. Number 2, the decision of the Attorney General. The fact that no decision as to how prosecutorial discretion is exercised is final until the prosecution is concluded provides no justification to pressure the Attorney General to interfere with the independent exercise of prosecutorial discretion. Director of Public Prosecutions. The main point of the Director of Public Prosecutions Act is to place discretionary decisions about the initiation and conduct of prosecutions in the hands of an independent, non-political Director of Public Prosecutions. Interference with his or her independent exercise of discretion by the Attorney General is exceptional and, to this point, unprecedented and risks calling into question prosecutorial independence and the rule of law. The Attorney General's role is not to minutely monitor and assess all of the myriad decisions that the DPP and her prosecutors make on a daily basis in the course of particular prosecutions. The Attorney General's authority with respect to particular prosecutions is limited and to be exercised only in highly exceptional circumstances which, as I have mentioned, no previous Attorney General has found to have arisen. The issue raised in the matters before the committee is the propriety of the conduct of others in trying in their interactions with the Attorney General of Canada and her staff to influence and or interfere with her decision making. In terms of the specific case of SNC-Lavalin, as I have previously testified, I received a Section 13 notice DPP regarding their intention not to invite SNC-Lavalin to negotiate a DPA. As you know, a Section 13 notice under the Act provides updates on prosecutions that are in the general interest. The information is provided to the Attorney General of Canada to act on or not as he or she deems appropriate. A Section 13 notice is just that, a notice. It does not require the Attorney General to make a decision or to take any action. Well, I cannot discuss the merits of the Section 13 notice in respect of SNC-Lavalin as the matter is subjudicial. What I can say is that after due diligence and consideration of the matter, I accepted the conclusions of the DPP's Section 13 notice and determined that I would not take any further action in the matter. When considering this Section 13 notice, and of course as necessary in my role, I respected the role of the DPP, her discretion, and the constitutional principles of prosecutorial independence and the rule of law. Further, I made this decision having a thorough understanding of the DPA regime given my previous knowledge and involvement with the regime. For example, in September 2017, in conjunction with Public Services and Procurement Canada, my department conducted a public consultation on expanding Canada's toolkit to address corporate wrongdoing. This was followed by a number of cabinet discussions on deferred prosecution agreements. Eventually, this led, through the Budget Implementation Act 2018, to an amendment to the Criminal Code to include this new tool. Changes that came into force in September 2018. As stated in my previous testimony, I had made this determination, this decision, prior to my meeting with the Prime Minister and the clerk on September 17th, 2018. I would also add that my review of the Section 13 notice did not require me to communicate a decision to the Prime Minister's office, which has no responsibility or authority in relation to the exercise of prosecutorial discretion. Further, and by way of background, when I was the Attorney General, I regularly received Section 13 notices, and in no case did I write a note to anyone about my stance in relation to the notice. As Deputy Minister Duran stated in her testimony, it's the role of any public prosecutor to continuously assess the public interest on whether or not to continue a specific case. Of course, this continuum, if I may say obligation, depends on new facts or evidence that can be submitted to the prosecutor. It is always open to the DPP to send an additional Section 13 notice if there are new facts, new information that the DPP believes the Attorney General should be aware of. The Attorney General may also be made aware of new facts or information at any time. Neither of these situations happened while I was the Attorney General. There was no new Section 13 notice provided to me by the DPP, and there were no new and relevant facts or contacts presented to me after my meeting with the Prime Minister on September 17th, 2018. There was no reason to reconsider that I would do what I would do in relation to the DPP Section 13 notice. As was always the case, I had confidence that the DPP and the PPSC were doing their job, and I did not have any reason to closely monitor their actions. Further, as the evidence before the committee reveals the efforts to pressure me to act and to use my authority to interfere with the prosecutorial discretion of the DPP, raised matters and considerations that are not appropriate. Certainly, any attempt to normalize such efforts is very dangerous to the institutions of our democracy. Again, this is the heart of the issue. The remainder of this submission supplements the timeline and detail of events I provided in my testimony. Again, my evidence is based on contemporaneous and detailed notes. Sorry if I butchered that word. In addition to my clear memory, which I am relying on among other documentation such as texts and emails. In many instances, I provide copies of a text or email as was requested by the committee. In other instances, I provide detail of a meeting or event which was raised in testimony subsequent to mine and which I did not have the opportunity to fully address in my previous testimony. To be clear, I have not repeated all of my previous testimony below. As such, for committee members and the general public to fully know the facts of this matter, they must revisit my earlier testimony in conjunction with the below. First item. On September 18th, 2018, we had a minister-deputy minister meeting in the afternoon where one of the important agenda items for me was to debrief my DM, Deputy Minister, the Department of Justice, DOJ officials, and staff on my meeting with the Prime Minister the day before. I relayed that I had undertaken to the Prime Minister that I would speak to my Deputy Minister and to the Clerk of the Privy Council. In this meeting, my deputy asked whether I had everything I needed to stand behind the PPSC's decision as communicated to me in the Section 13 notice. I indicated that I had what I needed and reiterated that I was not going to intervene. I further stated that I would speak to the clerk and ask my team to set this meeting up as soon as possible. Finally, I provided clear direction to my deputy, officials, and staff that no one but me was to speak to the clerk about this matter given my discomfort with the conversation I had with the Prime Minister and the clerk the day before. As such, a meeting with the clerk was subsequently set up for the following day. Item number 2. I indicated in my previous testimony that Miss Jessica Prince, my Chief of Staff, what is known as COS, had phone calls with Mr. Ben Chin and Mr. Justin Tao of Minister Monroe's office on September 20th, 2018. As I only referenced these calls in my previous testimony, I will now provide more detail as to the nature of these phone calls. With respect to Mr. Chin, my COS, Chief of Staff, was having a conversation with him on another matter when Mr. Chin segued the conversation to SNC and DPAs and said, "Your boss spoke to Bill Monroe yesterday, said that me and Elder were mucking around on this file. Be careful when using my name, Jess." Mr. Chin referenced my deputy minister's idea of someone calling the director of the PPSC and said that it seems like I had shut this idea down. He said there has to be some middle ground here because we are headed towards losing these guys, SNC. My chief of staff said that when it came to prosecutorial independence, there really is no middle ground and that the role of the Attorney General here is clear. Later, that same day, my chief of staff spoke to Justin Tao. Again, the call was supposed to be about another matter, but he, like Mr. Chen, steered the conversation to SNC and DPAs. Mr. Tao said, "Why can't SNC just go through the process?" My chief of staff explained to him that we do not control what goes through the DPA process. That is up to the PPSC, and that we do not and cannot control them in this decision. He said, "It's just a bit ironic that she wants an alternative justice process," a reference to restorative justice, "to be available in one sense, but not for SNC." He kept saying to my chief of staff that they just want to go through the process. He further said that there is a sense that you don't want this to happen at all. My chief of staff asked him what on earth he meant by that. Mr. Tao said that your boss has a philosophical, very tongue-tied, problem with it. That she hated it the whole time and wouldn't even use it if we could. My chief of staff said, that is absolutely not true. She told him that there was no philosophical opposition on my part. Mr. Tao followed up with my chief of staff by email later that day to apologize and said that he was sorry if there was any misunderstanding on the call. My chief of staff responded to him and said, "No hard feelings," and then she laid out all the things that I had done to support the DPA regime to happen in the first place and reiterated that the decision to enter into a DPA was not for the was for the PPSC. There's an email to that in exchange at Appendix A, which I will get to and read. Item number 3. On October 10th, 2018, SNC issued a media release indicating they had been advised by the PPSC that there will be no negotiations for a DPA. In the media release, SNC stated that it strongly disagreed with this decision and were reviewing its options to appeal this. Amy Archer at PMO contacted my chief of staff about a story in the Globe and Mail that pinned the decision on the government. My communications team reached out to the Globe at PMO's request to have the story clarified to reflect the facts that the decision was taken by the PPSC, which is independent of government. Of course, there's something in Appendix B, which I will read when I get there. Item 4. On October 19th, 2018, SNC filed a federal court application seeking to quash the DPP's decision to not enter into a remediation agreement with them. On October 22nd, 2018, I had a meeting with my deputy, officials, and staff in which we discussed SNC. Specifically, we discussed SNC's application to federal court and the nature of the DPP's legal representation in this matter. We discussed whether there was any precedent of DOJ acting for the DPP. After our discussion, I directed my Associate Deputy Minister to have someone speak to the Director and advise that the PPSC should hire a civil legal agent to represent them on this matter, and that the DOJ would not be providing counsel. I further instructed my ministerial staff that the Deputy Minister's office, and the Deputy Minister's office, that no one was to contact the DPP on SNC other than to provide the PPSC with names of counsel for their consideration, and that this was to be done by the end of the week. Item number 5. On November 13th, 2018, my deputy hand-delivered to my Chief of Staff a paper copy of a memorandum the clerk had asked the department to prepare entitled SNC Lavalin. 2 weeks earlier, the memo addressed the question of SNC's criminal prosecution and what would happen if the process results in a conviction. It also stated that there was no information to provide on the possible impact on the Quebec or Canadian economy of a possible conviction of SNC Lavalin. I was provided this note later the same day by my Chief of Staff. I note that Deputy Minister Nathal Durin, in her testimony to the Justice Committee of March 6, 2019, stated that the Privy Council Office asked the Department for an opinion on the potential impacts on the SNC Lavalin issue if the prosecution were to lead to a criminal conviction. In answer to a question, the Deputy Minister stated that she did not provide this report to the PCO because I was instructed by the Attorney General not to send it. I have no recollection, nor do I have any notes of having given this instruction to my Deputy Minister. It was my general practice when instructing my department to make a written note of it. I do, however, remember giving instructions on September 18th, 2018 to my deputy officials and staff about communications with the clerk as mentioned above. Instructions for which I do have a note, and as an aside, given that this request for an opinion came directly from the clerk, it does not make sense to me that I would have instructed not to share it. Further, I am not clear why the clerk would be asking for such an opinion in the first place, having known I had already considered the matter and had decided not to intervene. Item number 6. On December 7th, 2018, my office received a letter from the Prime Minister, dated December 6, 2018, which attached a letter from the CEO of SNC Lavalin, dated October 15th, 2018. This letter has been tabled with the committee. On December 14th, 2018, I responded to the Prime Minister by way of letter as follows. I do not have access to the official letter any longer, but I have an email record as to what the letter said. Dear Prime Minister Trudeau, thank you for your letter dated December 6, 2018, enclosing a letter to you from Mr. Neil Bruce, Chief Executive Officer of SNC Lavalin, dated October 15th, 2018. I have read your letter closely, as well as his. As you note, the matters raised in Bruce's letter are currently before the courts. As such, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on their substance. As you know, the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, that's the PPSC, which is solely responsible for making decisions with respect to remediation agreements and their applicability in a given case operates at arm's length and is independent of my department and my office. I appreciate having had this matter brought to my attention. Respectfully, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Item number 7. As I mentioned in my previous testimony, my Chief of Staff, Ms. Jessica Prince, on December 18, 2018, was summoned to an urgent chat with Katie and Jerry. There's an email request at Appendix C. I will read that. Gerald Butts and Katie Telford wanted to discuss SNC and wanted to find a solution. I have provided copies of a text message conversation between myself and my Chief of Staff shortly after this meeting. There's photographs of the text messages in Appendix D, and I will gladly read those. The following is our complete text conversation. I have only redacted parts in which we discussed extraneous matters. Jessica Prince. Hey boss, you free to chat? G and K, and it's obviously Gerald Butts and Katie Telford, summoned me to their office just now, urgently, to discuss the DPA RA matter. For context, they are speaking to the clerk now, but asked if, and they haven't finally decided this yet, you might be free to speak to the PM and the clerk tomorrow, should they decide later tonight that it is a good idea. To which Jody Wilson-Raybould replied, "What? What did they say?" Jessica Prince. Basically, they want a solution, nothing new. They want external counsel retained to give you an opinion on whether you can review the DPP's decision here and whether you should in this case. Someone like Bev McLaughlin. I told them that would be interference. Jerry said, "Jess, there is no solution here that doesn't involve some interference. At least they are finally being honest about what they are asking you to do. Don't care about the PPSC's independence." Katie was like, "We don't want to debate legalities anymore. They want to save people's jobs." Same as what they were saying before. Jerry told some story about how Mulrooney met with David Milgaard's mom, walked into the cab room and told Kim Campbell she had to fix it. She gave him all these AG reasons why she couldn't interfere, but then she ultimately did what Mulrooney wanted and was right. He kept saying, "This is economic policy. We have to save jobs." Jody Wilson-Raybould. Oh my goodness. I do not even know what to say to that. Jessica Prince. I made the point about how this is about protecting the AG role, and how if you interfere here, then you will be expected to all over the place. And there's a bit redacted in brackets. They didn't seem to get or even care. Yep, I was floored. They kept being like, we aren't lawyers, but there has to be some solution here. Jody Wilson-Raybould replies, So where were things left? LOL. Jessica Prince. So unclear. I said I would, of course, let you know about the convo, in brackets, check. And they said they were going to kick the tires with a few more people on this tonight. The clerk was waiting outside when I left, but they said they may want to set up a call between you and the PM and the clerk tomorrow. I said that, of course, you would be happy to speak to your boss. They seem quite keen on the idea of you retaining an ex-Supreme Court of Canada judge like the former chief to get advice on this. Katie Telford thinks it gives us cover in the business community and the legal community, and that it would allow the PM to say we are doing something. She was like, if Jody is nervous, we would of course line up all kinds of people to write op-eds saying that she is saying what she is doing is proper. P.S. I hate that they call you Jody. There's just some redacted stuff here. And it gets into Jody Wilson-Raybould. Do you know what the story regarding Milgard is? Jessica Prince. All Jerry said was that Mulrooney met David Milgard's mom, and I think she was asking for a review of his case. Campbell, as AG, said she could not interfere in an independent process, but then I think she ultimately ordered the Supreme Court of Canada to look at his case. By Jerry's telling, it was because Mulrooney told her that she had to find a solution. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Can you send Kim Campbell's cell number again? If you still have it, please and thanks. Of course, and great idea. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Thanks. Good grief. This is absurd. Jessica Prince. It is. And there's some redacted from Jody Wilson-Raybould. Jessica Prince. They clearly do not care about the PPSCs. Jerry kept talking about how it was created by Harper. I was like, sure, but it is what we have, and we have to respect the statute. No scruples. Jody Wilson-Raybould. So crazy. Jerry said the same thing to me. Jessica Prince. Like, he obviously doesn't like their institutional independence, but the solution is not to interfere, but to properly reform their structure, if you think that is required. Followed by some stuff that's redacted. A little later that evening, I spoke to my chief of staff by phone. I wanted to get a fuller understanding of the meeting she had with Mr. Butts and Miss Telford, given the nature of the conversation and how important it was. My chief of staff relayed 3 additional points about the meeting. First was with respect to the idea of a letter that I raised with the clerk back on September 19th, 2018. My chief of staff told Mr. Butts and Miss Telford that she and I had never heard anything from anyone on the idea of a letter. Mr. Butts dismissed the idea, saying that won't do anything. Second, on the idea of bringing in external counsel to get advice, my chief of staff asked Mr. Butts specifically what question or questions would be asked of the external counsel. He replied, whether the AG can review the DPP's decision here, and whether she should in this case. My chief of staff asked what if the opinion comes saying she can review it, but she shouldn't, or simply she can't review it, end of story. Mr. Butts stated it wouldn't say that. My chief of staff informed me that she remembered this very clearly because the response made her nervous. Third, and towards the end of the meeting, Mr. Butts looked at my chief of staff and said that he could not underscore enough how important this is. There was, according to my chief of staff, lots of eye contacts, and to use her words, it freaked her out. I recall my chief of staff sounding upset and emotional when talking to her on this when talking to her on this phone call. On the morning of December 19th, 2018, my text conversation with my Chief of Staff continued at 10:55 a.m. Pacific Standard Time as follows. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Going to meet PM KC, former Prime Minister Kim Campbell, in about an hour. There's some stuff redacted for a bit. Let me get back to Jody Wilson-Raybould. Thanks. Also, do we have any updates as to what happened in court? And do you remember day I met with clerk Jessica Prince? No update regarding court. Just at doctor's office. We'll ask FG Francois Giro. I will check regarding clerk date. September 19th is when you met the clerk. And there's some few lines of stuff redacted. Jessica Prince sent you the materials. Hope the meeting goes well. Jessica Prince. Hey boss, we just heard that the clerk would like to speak with you today. Let me know if you want to make this happen or if we can bump this to tomorrow. I think we know what it's about. Jody Wilson-Raybould. He texted me. I will follow up just in meeting right now. Jessica Prince. Of course. Dank, whatever that means. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Call you. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Calling you now, I mean. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Not answering. We'll try again in a bit. Jessica Prince. Gotcha. Thanks. My text conversation with my Chief of Staff continued after my phone conversation with the clerk later that day, as follows. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Call me, please. Followed by a bit of redaction. Jody Wilson-Raybould. Just talked to the clerk. Jessica Prince. Just on the bus. Can you give me 10 minutes? On December 19th, 2019, I did meet with former Prime Minister Kim Campbell, that's PMKC, who, of course, remains a member of the Privy Council at Granville Island in Vancouver, to discuss what Jerry Butts had said to my Chief of Staff the day before regarding her, former Prime Minister Mulroney, and the David Milgaard case. In our coffee meeting, we talked about the David Milgaard case. PMKC had a vivid memory of the case and reflected on it in a manner that reflected to me that it was still quite top of mind for her. Needless to say, she categorically denied what Mr. Butts had said and was quite offended and outraged by the comments. She adamantly denied the characterization not only of her as the Attorney General, but of her former boss, Prime Minister Mulroney. So, my interjection here, looks like Butts was lying about a former Conservative Prime Minister. Shocking. She further reflected, as she did in her memoirs done in 1996, that Brian Mulroney was much too good a lawyer to intervene improperly in the matter. He never breathed a word about the Milgaard case to his AG, nor did anyone in his office ever attempt to influence her handling of the case. Item number 8. So, like I said, Butts is full of crap. Oh, shock. Item number 8. As discussed in my previous testimony, I had a telephone call with the clerk, Michael Warnick, on December 19th, 2018. This call lasted 17.24 minutes. That's more likely the call that it's making the rounds on the internet and I have the video of. Feel free to watch that. We've got the tapes, I believe is what I called it. Normally, when I take an important call like this, I would often have a staff member with me to take notes. But in this case, I was alone in our condo in Vancouver. I was anxious to ensure that I had an exact record of this is the recorded phone call, exact record of what was discussed, as I had reason to believe that it was likely to be an inappropriate conversation. And boy, was it. So while I typed out notes during the phone call, I took the extraordinary and otherwise inappropriate step of making an audio recording of the conversation without so advising the clerk. I understand Canadian law properly, and again, I'm the lawyer, but I think in Canada, we have one-party consent, which means only one person needs to know that a recording is going on. So it isn't illegal. This is something that I have never done before this phone call and have not done since. I did this simply to ensure that my notes were accurate, and given the ongoing pressure and attempts to interfere, in this case, the nature of the conversations that had occurred on December 18, 2018 between my Chief of Staff and the PMO, and my strong suspicion that this matter would continue to escalate in even more inappropriate ways. While this recording was made simply as a personal aid memoir because I had no staff present to make notes, I am releasing the recording now, given the clerk's repeated assertions that he made no threats to me, veiled or otherwise, or that he had no recollection of the specifics of the call, or otherwise called into my question my previous testimony. The recording allows the members of the committee and the public to decide for themselves. And boy, thank you, Jody, it sure has. The following is a transcript of our conversation. See Appendix E. In addition, I have provided with the submission an audio recording of the conversation. I'm not going to read through this transcript. I have the video up on here. Feel free to reference that for the call. So I'm just going to quickly scroll through all this blue text. Okay, so here we are after that call ended. The next time I heard from the Prime Minister or anyone in the PMO was on January 7th, 2019, when the Prime Minister informed me that I was being shuffled out of my role as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. In my previous testimony, I only briefly recounted this conversation, as well as subsequent ones with the Prime Minister and Mr. Butts regarding the cabinet shuffle. Given that both the Prime Minister and Mr. Butts have spoken publicly about these conversations, I provide more detail and reflections below. I note at the outset it is correct that I was offered the job of Minister of Indigenous Services and turned it down. However, based on long-standing conversations with the Prime Minister and Mr. Butts, I was shocked and did not understand why they offered me this position, since prior to being appointed to Cabinet, I made it clear to the transition team and others that I could not and would not, in good conscience, ever be able to take on the ministerial role of delivering services to Indians and Indian Act bands under the Indian Act. Historically, this role was played by the Minister of Indian Affairs and currently by the Minister of Indigenous Services. Of course, in the language of many First Nations people, this role is understood as that of the Indian agent. For those who may be wondering, that term typically is used in a derogatory fashion. I'm going to interject something here, and of course, I wouldn't blame them. The Indian Act is an outright racist piece of documentation and should be abolished. Attempts have been made, but unfortunately, certain chiefs have blocked it, citing treaty. This is ridiculous. They obviously don't seem to not care about their own people, which is evident by the big expensive houses and fancy cars they drive, and why Harper put in the Accountability Act, making it possible for the people on the reserve to hold their chiefs into account. But I digress. Back to the submission. While this work is very important, and certainly I respect other Indigenous people who may wish to assume such a role, I would not and could not ever assume it myself. I understand and have experienced the Indian Act as a colonial instrument that has oppressed generations of Indigenous peoples, including my family. One of my cardinal life goals is to help transform the legal relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Crown and move beyond the Indian Act. And I hope she is able to be successful in that, even if she is a liberal, not a conservative. I think this is something that should go beyond political stripe. On multiple occasions over many years, the Prime Minister and Mr. Butts had heard this from me and demonstrated an understanding of my views. I have to interject here. This makes it very clear to me that their offering this was, they knew she would reject it, and was simply them forming up their scapegoat, which in itself is disgusting. As such, I was taken aback and surprised that they would ever propose that I assume such a role. I also note that while I love being the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, I have no recollection of referring to it as my dream job. It is my recollection that Mr. Butts referred to it as my dream job, and not the other way around. I am not sure I would refer to any job as a dream job. I also expressed to both the Prime Minister and Mr. Butts numerous times that I did not undertake the rationale for me being included in this cabinet shuffle, and that the cabinet shuffle would likely be very confusing for Canadians as well. That's quite the understatement. As part of these conversations, I did state to both of them that I believed that this shift was being made because of a decision I would not take in the SNC-Lavalin DPA matter, which they denied. Yeah. After much reflection, I decided to take the Prime Minister at his word that this was not the case, and accept a post I was honored to have as the Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defense. However, I did make another decision at this time, that I would immediately resign if the new Attorney General decided to issue a directive in the SNC-Lavalin matter that would confirm my suspicions as to the reason for the shuffle of me in particular. Wow! The mainstream media is not talking about that particular paragraph. That brings huge amount of insight into her resignation. Wow. The above, combined with my previous testimony, provides a comprehensive account of the material information that I have to provide about the period of time that I was Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and the issue of a potential DPA for SNC-Lavalin was the subject of conversation. Finally, while not covered by the Order in Council 2019-0105, I want to confirm, as has been publicly reported, that I did have a series of meetings with the Prime Minister in Vancouver post January 14th, 2019. Meetings which led to my resignation from Cabinet. The Prime Minister stated publicly when issues about the propriety of the government's conduct in relation to the SNC matter arose, that my ongoing presence in Cabinet spoke for itself. I resign the next day, and I trust my resignation also speaks for itself. Oh boy, she's not mincing words here. As such, for my part, I do not believe I have anything further to offer a formal process regarding this specific matter. Though, of course, if compelled or asked to participate in a judicial, investigative, or parliamentary process, I would do so. What processes, opportunities, or requirements there may be for other individuals to speak who have material information regarding this matter must be determined by others. In closing, however, I wish to offer 3 personal observations. First, there is much to be learned from this matter. Certainly, I have learned a lot about the relative strength or weakness of standards and institutions of our democracy, as well as the challenges and cynicisms that pervade our politics. Ultimately, Canadians will judge the importance and meaning of what has transpired, and changes and reforms may flow from that. I do think there are clear lessons that have to be considered around the role of the Attorney General, the principles underpinning our democracy, and the appropriate role of political considerations in decision making, particularly regarding legal questions. Further, based on how matters have unfolded since the media reported on this matter, I also think there is significant dialogue to be had about accountability and transparency, including the foundations for advice that is given to government on how to deal with matters of public focus, the veracity of evidence in support of that advice, how these matters are reported on by the media, and decisions that are made about how to best address matters promptly, responsibly, and openly. Second, apart from the substantive issues regarding prosecutorial independence and the rule of law, in my view, this episode has also revealed some fissures and weaknesses in our governing institutions that we should be working together across party lines to fix. There is, at the very least, a legitimate perception that we need more robust public processes for oversight, accountability, investigation, and truth-seeking regarding the functioning of our institutions, and that ensure the public interest and public good is upheld. The fact that basic elements of due process, the principles of natural justice, the procedural fairness are not a greater influence and factor in how we go about identifying the facts and relevant evidence of matters related to the operation of democratic institutions is a concern. Part of this is the long-standing issue and necessity of supporting greater roles, authorities, and responsibilities for all members of Parliament, regardless of party or title within government. In election after election, strengthening the roles of individual members of Parliament is highlighted, including the importance of them having a degree of independence and autonomy from purely partisan considerations or directions to do important work on behalf of their constituents and all Canadians. More concrete reforms in this regard are needed. Yeah, I think so. I actually have to admit I agree with her. We can and must do better, and I hope we can do that together. Third, a significant part of the public dialogue about this matter has touched on issues of race and gender, and in particular, there have been undeniable elements of misogyny, much of it aimed at myself. While this is unfortunate and unpleasant, I also see the benefits this entire episode can bring to building a stronger Canada. and strengthening our civil society. In particular, over the past 7 weeks, the thing that I have heard most from Canadians is their true belief and desire to see fundamental and desire to see fundamental and transformative and not merely ephemeral change in our modes of public discourse, the health of our institutions, civic engagement, and the standards we uphold. For each cynical commenter and commentary, I esteem to have encountered 10 Canadians thinking and acting about what these events mean for the future they are helping to build. So I take the opportunity to thank those Canadians from coast to coast to coast who give me hope and look forward to acting alongside them into the future, a future where we truly do politics differently. Thank you again to the committee for receiving this submission. Respectfully, Jody Wilson-Raybould, PC, QC, MP, Member of Parliament for Vancouver, Granville. Here we have some emails from Justin Tao. This was sent September 20th, 2018 to Jessica Prince. Regarding, okay, so I'll just skip down to the main body of it. On September 20, 2018, Jessica Prince wrote, "Hi, Justin. This is Tao, not Trudeau. Thanks and no hard feelings. My boss presented the MC on this, and she amended the criminal code to allow for DPAs. As I now understand it, she'll be bringing a second MC to get some amendments made in the Senate." I'm not sure what an MC means, but well, I don't think she has a particular opinion on DPAs because, as discussed, their use falls within the discretion of the PPSCs, and there's some stuff blotted out. Happy to chat further if it's helpful, Jess. From Justin Tao to Jessica Prince, September 20th, 2018. Hey, thanks for that, and apologies for thinking anything else. This is looks like a memo of sorts from David Taylor to Jody Wilson-Raybould, carbon copy to Jessica Prince regarding media and RAs. Says Roger that. Sent from my BlackBerry 10 smartphone on the blah blah blah. Okay, let's get to the bottom of this, the meat of this. Okay, this is fine. Please do not say anything more on this. Thanks. Hi, Minister of Justice, Attorney General. PMO has asked us to reach out to media who are writing erroneous stories about the DPP's decision not to seek an RA with SNC-Lavalin. Here is the story. I have highlighted the incorrect portion. PMO wants us to correct to make it clear that it was the DPP and not the Government of Canada. We'd do it by phone. It would be simple. The Director of Public Prosecutions made the decision. It is independent of the Government of Canada. Could you please have your first sentence reflect that fact? SNC-Lavalin says Ottawa shut door on remediation deal. The Globe and Mail, this is an article from the Globe and Mail by Nicholas Van Perret. SNC-Lavalin Group Incorporated says the Canadian government declined to enter into negotiations on a deal that would settle corruption and fraud charges against the company, a surprising development that further clouds the engineering firm attempts to put its ethics scandals behind it. The shares fell nearly 13% in Wednesday morning trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange to $45.22. Montreal-based SNC-Lavalin, Canada's biggest engineering company, said in a statement Wednesday that it has been advised by the Director of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, DPPSC, that at this time the prosecution service will not invite the company to negotiate a union agreement. The company said it strongly disagrees with the DPPSC's current position and remains open to striking a deal. It said it is reviewing its options to appeal the decision. The development is a blow to SNC-Lavalin Chief Executive Neil Bruce's efforts to shut the door on a series of legacy issues that have soaked up resources and hampered the company's competitive position against global rivals over the past 6 years. This past May, the company struck a $110 million agreement to settle class action lawsuits related to allegations the engineering firm misled investors about its activities in Libya. More to come. So it's very clear that the Prime Minister was already well advanced to try and set up the spin that the government had nothing to do with this. This was the independent arm. Well, that's pretty much all that I've got. There's more on here, but it's all just recapping everything that I've already discussed. As I said, the link will be in the description, so you feel free to take a look at it and see for a fact that I'm not really hiding anything of great import. But hope you've enjoyed. I know it's been long, and if you've been here free from the beginning, I thank you for your patience. Thank you, and have a good day. Well, that's all I have for today. Like if you like, share, comment, and of course, subscribe. And remember, working together, we can help keep Canada free. Thank you, and have a good day.